Okay, I am sitting here with Angela Sylvaine, who is a self-proclaimed cheerful goth. And cheerful, yes, I haven't seen the goth side. But she is the author of Frostbite, which I have my signed copy here. And I would consider this a sort of a small press breakout success from my perspective. So, Angela, how are you doing?
Oh, great. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm really happy to have you on. In fact, when I first put out the call for authors, like, hey, does anybody want to be interviewed? And you reached out to me, I was like, oh, okay, this is legit now. I need to actually make this something, So, I've done a few interviews, built my way up to this, and you are someone I admire quite a bit because I started kind of like following your journey into publishing Frostbite around the time when I was starting to get a lot more active on social media. And I noticed that you started getting a lot more active as well. So I want to ask you about sort of your journey getting Frostbite out into the world and especially your social media presence because you seem to be having a lot of fun with it.
I am, yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things that you can treat as a chore or you can treat as a legitimate way to connect with people that like what you like, and could potentially be friends, right? I mean, that's how you and I met, was we have a lot in common and you're fun to interact with. So I think, that's the key, is like just try to make it what you want it to be, try to make it fun. I hope I do. So
Oh no, you're a blast to follow. And I noticed that you're doing sort of like the cross-platform approach where you post a lot on Instagram and now Threads and you're on TikTok. Do you have different approaches for each different platform?
well, I think I'm still figuring that out, honestly. It's not so much of a challenge with those that don't follow you on every platform, because there are people who like one or the other, or maybe they're on two, but not others. But then you also have friends who follow on all of them, and you don't necessarily want to always give them like a repetition of content, where like I'm posting the exact same thing every time. So honestly, I think I'm still kind of figuring that out, is like what's that good balance. But certainly I double up sometimes. If it's just like a quick post, I might kind of put it everywhere. But obviously videos are better for TikTok and photos are better for Instagram. So I think there's a way to kind of say what you want to say, but make it slightly different for each one and like engaging for the people that you interact with.
Absolutely. No, I would actually agree with that. And part of your social media push has been doing a lot of podcast interviews. I've noticed you've been very busy on podcasts recently. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm like one of the last ones to interview you. I listened to you on the We Bleed Orange and Black podcast, which was awesome. I learned so many fun things about you, and it's good for me to do my own research. So I make sure I'm not asking the same questions. But I'm going to ask you to expand on some of those things I learned a bit later.
Okay.
Um,
Sounds great. Yeah. And I love that
yes.
podcast. And really, like, what happened is why I'm on so many podcasts is I basically just reached out to a lot of people that I like who do podcasts that I listen to and asked them if I could be a guest. And I just got more positive responses than I was expecting,
Yes.
which is always nice.
And you know what's funny? This is not me being a creep. I just have a really good memory. I remember months ago, before I even read Frostbite, you posted you might have posted on Instagram or maybe it was Twitter back when Twitter was Twitter, like, hey, does anybody want to guest on a podcast? And
Yep.
yeah, you were just like, hey, I'm here. I want to promote this book. And I think that's great. And all this time later, here you are on a bunch of different podcasts, and you're very, very fun to listen to. So it's
Oh,
cool to
thank
have you on
you.
here.
I like to talk, so that makes it relatively easy.
Well, I guess we should get this out of the way. You've had to do this quite a bit, but I do want you to tell everyone, in case they don't know somehow, what this book Frostbite is about.
Sure. So it's a 90s sci-fi horror comedy. So like, just squeeze in as many genres as you can. That's about a small town in North Dakota that gets hit by a meteor and infects the hibernating prairie dogs with alien worms. So then they like rise up and attack and start infecting other animals and people. And the main character, Raylene, and her best friend Nate have to basically fight to save their town from these alien infested creatures while also battling a doomsday cult.
Basically all my favorite things all in one book,
Right?
which is why,
Creatures, cults,
yeah.
me too.
Yeah, so my journey with this book is that I actually read an art copy on Book Sirens, which is such a fun platform, and I'm going to show everybody again because we have more views on the YouTube versions of these interviews than we do for the iTunes podcast. But this book cover is magnificent, and it's part of why I wanted to purchase a copy, even though I read a free copy, because it is just so cool. And you've talked on other podcasts about sort of your journey with with dark matter, looking at artists, and this is actually like a Disney artist, right? Like he
That's
works on a
right.
lot of
Yeah.
really cool stuff.
Yeah, we basically, so Dark Matter, my publisher, Rob, my editor, Rob, gave me some choices of artists. And we ultimately kind of narrowed it down to Eric Habeller because his style was sort of what we were looking for. And the prompt we gave him was an Amblin movie cover or movie poster. So like, Indiana Jones or Adventures in Babysitting or Goonies, that kind of style. And he just totally nailed it.
Yeah, and it looks airbrushed and appropriately cartoony, and it sets the tone. It's absolutely wonderful. Who wouldn't want to buy that cover if they are buy the book if they saw it at a bookstore? Um, so okay, so getting into your journey with Dark Matter, you know, it's a publisher that has pretty close ties with a lot of really popular authors, but some of the names I want to bring up, Haley Piper, Max Booth III, Erica T. Worth. How does it feel to have all of these authors blurb your debut novel? It's got to be exciting.
Oh my God, it's amazing. And again, it's like something I never expected that response, right? So I've met a lot of them or worked with them on smaller projects, like been in anthologies with them or connected with them on social media, or met them at a conference. And so when it came time to ask for blurbs, I just kind of decided to shoot my shot. I was like, what's the worst thing that can happen is they say, they can't do it right now. They're too busy or it's just not a good fit for them. So I just put myself out there and asked, and I was really like so excited that so many amazing authors said yes, which I think is just a reflection on how awesome the horror community is, that they would give their time to support me, is really an honor, honestly. So I think it's more of a credit to them for being the kind of people that are helping others come up in the community is just like such a precious gift.
Awesome. Awesome. Love hearing that. And you're probably in a position now where people are asking you for blurbs, I would assume.
That's true. I will admit. And I have to say, now I see it from the other side of like having to kind of decide how many you can do and what you have time for. And you really don't want to say no if you
Mhm.
can avoid it, right? You want to support others. So it's interesting seeing it from the other side.
Yeah,
And an honor for me to be asked too. So yep, you'll be seeing more blurbs from me as well.
absolutely. Yeah, the author I bring up all the time, whose name I see everywhere on almost every cover, is Clay McLeod Chapman, who seems to blurb every single book under the sun.
Right?
So, which, hey, great! It's great to support other authors. I love that. So let's talk about your journey getting published at Dark Matter. You've talked about pitching Frostbite to them first as a novella and then expanding it, or them asking you apparently to expand it into a novel. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I actually pitched it to them via Pit Dark on what used to be
Uh-huh.
Twitter. So they liked my pitch and reached out to me and said, we want to know more. Send us your manuscript. So I did. So that's kind of where it all started. And technically, I signed the contract with them, kind of either way, but they said, yeah, we think this would make a really great novel. We'd like you to expand it. We'll publish it either way. But what do you think? And I was totally game and really excited that they had that confidence in me to kind of give me that creative freedom. And working with Rob was super fun. So we just brainstormed a lot about how to expand the scope of the story and what the plot would look like and everything. And it was just a wonderful process expanding it to a novel.
Hmm. That's pretty incredible because so for people who don't know what Pit Dark is, which writers listen to this, so they probably know, but yeah, it's just annual. I think maybe it happens twice a year, but you just do a very short pitch on Twitter or X now, and publishers can look, they can like it, agents can like it, and if they like it, you can send them a full manuscript or a full submission. I'm curious, what did that tweet look like when you originally pitched Frostbite? Do you remember at all?
Yeah, I had a couple of versions of it, but I think it was something like, so I made a big effort to use comps. I think that catches people's eyes in a short pitch, like on Twitter. So it was Gremlins meets Fargo, and then I had another one that was Critters meets Fargo. So that was like the eye-catching first part, and then just a really short little tagline: a small town in North Dakota gets hit by a meteor infecting the prairie dogs with alien worms. Best friends must save the town, kind of a thing. So yeah, it was really short and sweet, but I think the comps are kind of what did it, and were more like the eye catcher.
And that's great too, because I think a lot of writers that are going on submission, they think, this has to be absolutely perfect or it's going to get rejected, right? But in your case, you had a really great idea and a really great pitch, and they're like, we'll take this either way, but it'd be great if you could expand it into a novel. And that is really, really cool. So,
Yeah, it was awesome. And I think that's kind of like the nice part about working with an indie publisher is sometimes you have a little more flexibility with them to kind of explore what's the best way to roll something out. So yeah, it was awesome.
fantastic. Well, digging into the story a little bit, they say to write what you know, and I know that you grew up in North Dakota. You're not currently there, but you knew the environment really well, and the way it's written, you can tell you're from North Dakota because there's like this love that you put into describing the environments and even the honesty about it being, a really quiet city that time just kind of forgets about, which is a big theme of the story, which I want to bring up. um I wonder how long the story has been building in your mind. Was this something that you were thinking about while you were living in North Dakota, or is it something that popped up recently?
Well, probably not while I was living in North Dakota because I moved after college and I didn't actually start writing until my 30s. I've always been a big reader, but it kind of never crossed my mind that I could do it myself. So it wasn't until my 30s that I started writing. But pretty much right away, I knew I would want to set something there because I have such a connection to the place and felt like it was something I could really like deliver on the experience. So I knew I wanted to do something there for sure. And I think when I first kind of I've written a couple stories there, particularly kind of like surrounding the trailer park where I grew up. Um, but this is like the longest work that I've done there. And it really just started as wanting to do something kind of fun, science fiction, like wacky science fiction. So that's where the idea really started. And then it just kind of went from there.
That's great. That's great. And you mentioned that you did grow up either around or in a trailer park, which is really interesting. Did you I don't believe you say you base Raylene on you, but there are certain parts of your childhood and childhood friends that you sort of placed within the characters. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I would say Raylene isn't really based on me. Honestly, I wish she were because she's like way more snarky than I was at that age. I was a bit more of a, toe the line and be a good kid. You know, I wish maybe I had a little more of her attitude at that age. But really, what about her comes from me is more the setting, like, growing up in that environment. And there's a few little other nuggets that I pulled in to just kind of like beef up her backstory. Like her dad was in the military and he was in Vietnam, and so was my dad. So I think that's something probably a lot of authors do is to kind of add some personality and like spice to their characters. Just pulling in those little personal nuggets that really make it resonate. Even though it's not my story, there's like little bits and pieces in there.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure I don't pass over you mentioning that you didn't start writing until you were 30, because anyone listening to this or watching this, it really is never too late. You know, I
That's
mean,
right.
here you are, someone who has just reached triple digit reviews on Goodreads, and you didn't even start writing until you were 30, which is it's very, very cool. So I think
Totally.
there's a lot to take away from that.
I hope people do. And I think, yeah, you're never too old to learn or try something that you really want to do. And that's actually been sort of the fun part, honestly, about I mostly try to keep my day job separate because I also have a day job. And I use a pen name. So people at work don't always make the connection with my writing, but more people are finding out about it lately. And it's amazing how many people have reached out to me to say, I've always wanted to try and write. Can I talk to you about it? Or they have other talents and skills that are totally hidden in their day-to-day life. Like one of my coworkers that works in IT was like, oh, I have a podcast. Will you come on? And I never would have known that. So it's just been really cool to see that other side of people.
Are you going on their podcast?
I did. Yes.
Oh, that's
It's called the
great.
Stray Pointers Podcast. I'll give him a heads
Pointers.
up,
Okay.
like a little shout out. So yeah, that was cool to see someone that I know in a very different capacity, you know.
That's awesome. We'll link it. Yeah, give that person a little boost. What is your day job? Or if you are trying to keep it a little incognito, what sort of industry is it in?
Well, I don't need to keep it incognito. It's totally cool. I'm a project manager,
Okay.
which at like a family-owned bank. So yeah, I technically work in finance, but it's more on the project management side, which is actually really helpful and I think impacts how I write because I'm very organized. Like I'm all about spreadsheets and timelines and things.
That is an amazing interview answer, because you are taking a trait from a job and relating it to your passion. I love it
That's
so
right. I
much.
think it helps me be a more productive because I'm used to like holding people accountable for deadlines and looking at that finish line when you actually have to get something done. So
Yes, I always think it's so interesting when I hear about what we think about writers, and I have your name on a book on my bookshelf, and it's like I think of you as a writer, and I think of writers as writers, but what do they do to actually make money?
yeah.
That's just so interesting that you work in finance. How about that?
Yeah. And the vast majority of writers can't write full time. You
Mhm.
know, that is like the reality of the situation. I don't necessarily anticipate that I ever will be able to. And also I like my day job, so that works out great. Um, so yeah, vast majority of writers have like this double life, which is very cool.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So diving back into the story, one of the things that resonated with me with Frostbite was the theme of memory that's running throughout it. So it deals a lot with memory and the concept of especially being forgotten. That's something I really loved about Raylene. She sort of keeps coming back to this idea where, am I going anywhere? Am I going to do anything? Is time going to forget me? And then you have her mother, which has Alzheimer's, and then you have these worms, which are starting to basically eat away memories. So, were you always planning to make memory a theme here, or did it just come together in pieces during the writing process?
It totally happened organically, which is like the best feeling, as you know, being a writer. When that happens, you're like, aha. So kind of how it came about was I knew I wanted to make her kind of struggling with something really meaningful with her mother. And Alzheimer's runs in my family as well. So it's something I have experience with, and was kind of hoping to capture as far as a battle that a lot of us have to fight with like aging parents and things like that. So that's kind of where it started. But then when I was thinking about the aliens and how to make them different from what other people have done, I had to kind of come up with an idea that wasn't done before. So like what could these aliens do to people that maybe I haven't already seen in a book or a movie? And that's where I thought, if I have them take people's memories, that would be perfect. Because what is basically the worst thing that could happen to Raylene is now everyone she knows is basically experiencing the symptoms of dementia, just like her mother. So, they say torture your protagonist. And that seemed like the perfect way to do it.
Yeah, and I do think of this book as a little more sci-fi than horror. I would call it light horror.
Mhm.
And what I love about the stakes is that, yeah, obviously they're external stakes, but it's also very personal. And I think the best horror, it deals with, personal themes. So Alzheimer's runs in my family as well, and I think that's why it resonated with me quite a bit. But the other thing that comes up is religion, which is really interesting because listening to you on, I think it was the Talking Scared podcast or something. You're talking about how you've had you studied it as an academic, you studied cults, you
Yeah.
studied religion and psychology, and you've actually had professors who were in cults. So where did all that come from? What was the inspiration behind having this religious extremist at the forefront as sort of like our actual antagonist besides the worms?
Well, first of all, it sort of started with a comment from my editor. So when we were talking about expanding it from a novella to a novel, he said, you probably need a human antagonist. Like, it was in the shorter version, it was basically like the aliens are who you're fighting. They're the bad guy. And we needed to add someone that was human to fight as a bad guy in the longer version. And when I started to think about what that would be, honestly, it was just kind of like reflecting on the world to say, how would people react to something like this happening? And I think we see all the time that folks sometimes use their beliefs to sort of justify something that's happening around them or misinterpret it, right? We even saw that with COVID and things like that. So it just made logical sense to me that there would be a religion that would see this happen and say, oh, yep, this is Judgment Day. All our predictions are coming true. The doomsday is here. So yeah, it just made sense to me. It would go in that direction. And it probably was just at the top of my mind anyway, because I'm obsessed with cults. So I'm basically always looking for a reason to write in a cult.
Yeah, you said on another podcast that you think you would make the best cult leader because you've studied them so much.
I know I won't do it. It's too much work, but, and also wrong.
Yes, yes. Well,
And
you
also
could be
wrong.
you could be an ethical cult leader, okay? They're not all
Maybe.
bad, just
Yeah.
most of the time.
I've joked with one of my friends, Shelly, that we could start a cult, but it would be kind of a good cult, and we would also run an animal shelter. So it would be like, I
It's
don't know
pretty
what the
good.
tipping point is where you go bad, but that's our initial idea to start. We would just have to make sure we don't get, drunk on our own power.
Awesome, awesome. And so Zebediah, which by the way, great name, incredible.
Thanks.
I call him delightfully cartoonish. But he's so every time he showed up on the page, I laughed a little bit because he is very over the top, but in a way where it is realistic, unfortunately. Did
Sadly.
you did you ever worry that you were going a little too over the top with him, or is that exactly how you envisioned it when you're expanding it into a
Yeah,
novel?
I mean, I knew it was going to be a comedy as well.
Mhm.
So you can get like sillier with stuff and do things that probably wouldn't be acceptable in something that isn't a comedy. In my mind, I always thought of him as a North Dakota cross between Jerry Falwell and David Koresh. So I had
Interesting.
this like amalgam in my mind of who I thought he would be and what he was based on. So that's kind of where he came from, but sillier.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And he is a very, very fun character. So you mentioned before some of the comps that you provided when you were pitching this, but it seems like a lot of people are throwing in what they believe are the closest comps to this. What are your favorites? Some of your favorites that you've heard this being compared to?
Well, I'll probably mention the ones I hadn't thought of because I had thought of some intentionally, right, to be able to
Mhm.
pitch and to promote the book and everything. But a couple that I was like delightfully surprised were The Faculty which I think you said.
That
I
was me. That was
remember.
me. I love The Faculty. It's one of my favorite movies.
I
And I
love
think
it.
this is so close to The Faculty. So yes,
And I had never thought of
fantastic.
it. So I was
Because
like,
90s nostalgia, like it's perfect. By the way, we don't get enough 90s nostalgia. I hope this starts a trend. Okay. We
me
did
too.
the 80s. We've had a lot of 80s. Let's do some 90s. Please continue.
I agree completely. And yes, and then I rewatched The Faculty shortly after I saw that because I was like, oh my God, I love that movie. I didn't think of that at all. So that was amazing. And then the other one was The X-Files.
Hmm.
Because I just had never thought of it in that context. And I was an X-Files super fan. Like when I was in college, we used to record all the episodes on VHS. So I literally had like box full of VHS tapes packed with X-Files episodes. So the fact someone thought it was like that was like a real compliment.
Hmm. Well, in this ends in a way where you have a really great kind of like government like secrecy thing going on in the book, and the epilogue ends in kind of like an X-Files kind of way. To me it was very Stranger Things, where it's like, okay, we have sort of our close-ended story, then the end, which I'm not going to spoil. It's like, oh no, there's definitely stuff that's going to happen after this. So um do we have to just wait and see what's coming for spring 2025, or is there anything that you can tell us now as to where the story's going from here?
Well, I can't tell you too much, only because, in all honesty, I'm still writing it.
Okay. Great.
So who knows? You know how stories go. They have a mind of their own, and you go in with a plan, but that plan doesn't always work out. So the
Hmm.
plan right now is to take Nate and Raylene on the road for spring break, which is such a 90s experience, right? Like
Yes,
MTV spring break was a whole vibe.
indeed it was. I
So
remember.
so I wanted to incorporate that. So that's the plan as of right now, is to have a little spring break getaway. But we'll see how that actually comes to fruition.
Excellent. Can't wait. But until then, we do have a lot more of your writing on the way. So, Dark Matter Inc. is publishing a whole short story collection from you. So you have dabbled in short stories and you're a part of collections, but this one is 100% you, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it'll be my first one that's 100% me. So I'm really excited. It's called The Dead Spot: Stories of Lost Girls. And it's a little darker. There's still some of the beta readers and folks who have been nice enough to blurb and write the foreword for it have said there's still wit. There's still a little humor and wit, as is my style, but it's definitely darker than Frostbite. So a little bit less funny and more dark, which my short stories tend to be. I don't know, my short work tends to be a little more dark. And then when I write something longer, it just starts to become more wacky. I don't know why that is, but that's just how it goes.
Interesting. So it sounds like we're going to be getting the goth side of you and not the
That's
cheerful side.
right. Yep, I think you're right. So we'll see how people like it.
Love
Hopefully,
it.
it'll make you sad, but we'll still be kind of sweet. Sweet but sad. That's the vibe.
Yes, yeah. But on top of that, we also have apparently a re-release of something you've written before called Shopping Spree. What's
Yeah.
what's going on there?
So my only novella I've ever published was through Unnerving as part of their Rewind or Die series, which was amazing to be part of. So many of the people who have written for that, like Haley Piper and V. Castro and others, are such heroes of mine. So it was a real honor to be included in that. So it originally released with them as like a short novella. And then Dark Matter actually approached me to say, hey, we would like to acquire the rights to this and have you do like an expansion and re-release, which I was totally game for. I loved the world, and the opportunity to maybe expand the story a little bit was really exciting to me. Even though I loved the shorter version, it just sounded like a fun challenge. So yeah, so I just actually finished writing that expanded version, and we're gonna have be announcing a cover here soon, a new cover, and whatnot soon. I think it'll be coming out in fall of 2024. And as far as what it's about, it's a retro 80s reminiscent mall slasher. So it's about a group of kids that are trapped in a mall being chased by a masked killer, but there's a twist.
There's a twist you can't tell us.
No, I'll give you a hint. There might be a cult.
Well, of course there's a cult. I feel
Because
like, so I'm hearing two recurring themes here. People love your shorter work and they're like, hey, we can't get enough of this. We want more pages. Okay. And two, we love cults.
that's right. We love cults, and also we love nostalgia. Like
Yes,
you said,
yes.
80s and 90s, it's a lot of fun.
So, okay, so your shorter fiction, you get a little darker, but you said your longer fiction, you tend to be a little bit more silly, right? Do you prefer to write in a way where you're bouncing back and forth between those tones? Do you feel like you need a little levity after you write something dark?
So, yeah, I think it's good for my state of mind. And it also just lets me explore like the different facets of what I like to write. And additionally, like I've thought about that. I think maybe the reason my longer work doesn't go as dark is just because at the end of the day, while I have like a goth tendencies and I like dark and spooky things, I'm a pretty cheerful person. And so if I'm going to spend like 6 months or a year in a story, I sort of need a little bit of a break. I need a little breathing room and some opportunities to laugh. So I think that just comes out when I'm spending longer with a thing. It just starts to get a little bit wackier or funnier.
Yeah, I get that. And I think YA is a really good place to do that, right? Because adult horror now, it seems to go really dark really fast. But with YA, it does seem like you can add a lot more levity. You have characters who are like, oh, what's going on, but they're still thinking about kids, or it's still thinking like kids, right?
Yeah,
And one of the
definitely.
funnest things of the story, one of the funnest things about any of these alien invasion stories is how the kids try to figure out how to defeat these aliens. And you actually have a very cool way of going about that without spoiling, weaknesses and whatnot, because it is a really exciting third act. How did you come up with that? I'm assuming that this started somewhere within the expansion process, or did you
It
still
did.
have some semblance of the idea for the last act in the novella?
Yeah, there was a little bit of it there, but honestly, it wasn't very well developed. It was probably kind of lacking. Like the solution wasn't good enough, kind of. So really, that was one of the hardest things for me to figure out, honestly. And there was a lot of going back and forth with my editor and just brainstorming to kind of find the best solution that would make the most logical sense and have like a good payoff. So yeah, it was just a lot of brainstorming, honestly, to come up with it. But I'm happy with how it all worked out. Seems like it, makes sense, and it was something that those guys could have figured out to be able to
Mhm.
defeat the aliens, and is believable.
Yeah, and it just flies right off the page. You're like, this should be a movie. It's very cinematic in the way you describe it. So I hope someday this can be adapted into a movie, a limited series, something like that, because it's really, really cool. Like
That'd
I
be the
said,
dream.
more 90s nostalgia, please.
That's
Crazy
right.
things have
Netflix,
happened.
call me.
Well, hey, they just might. They just might.
Maybe.
Um, so a question for you. Are you a fan of YA horror or dark fantasy? Is that something that you read a lot?
Yeah, I love YA horror. I've read it ever since I was a YA person. So I kind of used to read Christopher Pike. That's where it all started for me. Read a ton of Christopher Pike, still love it today. I've got like a ton of Christopher Pike books in my library. But more modern books I've read recently that I've really loved are Hatchet Girls, which is like a YA modern retelling of Lizzie Borden. So
Mhm.
that one's great. And then I also loved You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight, which
I've
is,
read it.
have you
Yep,
read it?
it's
It's so
great.
good, right? I think the
Yes.
idea of kids working at a terror camp where they're acting like serial killers and chasing around guests is the absolute perfect fodder for a horror novel,
Mhm.
and what happens when like real killing starts. So those are two of my like recent favorites I've really loved.
That's great. And also, where can I find that business? Because that sounds like an interactive horror experience that I would absolutely love to
Me
be a part
too.
of, but also to participate in. So
I would like to be an actor in that, you know?
I would too. I feel like it would be a blast. Okay, so with a couple minutes left here, is there anything you're reading currently or anything you've watched recently that you want to tell people about?
Well, I just started Candy Cane Kills, which has
Yes.
been on my list as like one of my most anticipated reads of winter. So I feel like it's the perfect time to read it. And I also love Brian McCulley. He's amazing. Loved Curse of the Reaper. So I'm sure I'm going to love and devour that one. And
And he
then
blurbed your book.
that's right, he did. He's so
Yes.
nice. I met him at StokerCon and sort of like forced an arc on him. Not forced. I very nicely was like, "Would you like one?" And then later I reached back out and said, "Would you be willing to write a blurb?" And he was so nice about it, and he did. So another
Yeah.
example of an extremely generous person. So yeah, read Candy Cane Kills because he's amazing. And then as far as what I'm watching Murder at the End of the World. Is probably
Oh.
my favorite show right now because again, wintry, it's very spooky winter. So the vibes are similar to North Dakota, but it takes place in Iceland. So it's like an isolated kind of murder mystery with true crime like components. And I'm a big fan of true crime too. So I'm loving Murder at the End of the World.
So that filmmaking duo of Britt Marling and I think it's Zal Batmanglich. I don't know how you pronounce his last name. I hope I did an okay job. They sort of popped onto the scene right as I was like in my junior year of film school, and I was like, wow, you can do really cool cerebral things with very little money. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of their work.
Yeah, I'm loving the show. And it's already inspired the next book I want to work on, which I don't have time to work on now, so I can't let it distract me. But
Oh, I can't wait to
my
hear what
next
that's
big
about.
idea is like YA horror meets true crime. So we'll see where
Yes.
that takes me.
Awesome, awesome. I can't wait to read it. Well, with that, we do need to wrap up, but again, Angela Sylvaine, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been an absolute delight, and you, as always, are a delight to chat with.
You too. It's been so fun. I really appreciate you having me.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. Again, the book is Frostbite, and it is a beautiful little book. And join the crowd and everybody go out and read it because it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon.